What's up, guys? In today's video, we're going to talk about philosophy in Naruto. We're going to talk about just the general philosophy that a lot of characters in the show have and how it kind of relates to other characters in the show and how it relates to philosophies, externally from the show. And yeah, so I have a little PowerPoint because I'm not good at editing, so PowerPoint just makes everything easier. But yeah, you don't have to look at the screen. I'm gonna talk about everything that I have on the screen anyway, so you don't have to look. You can kind of put it on the background, or you could look. I do have some pictures, so it's up to you. But first of all, like the general message that I think the show kind of brings is being persistent in kind of believing yourself, right? Like it kind of gives the idea of never giving up to an extreme level, right? Like almost like insanity. And it also kind of shows like a persistent forgiveness. No matter what somebody's done, no matter who you are, you can be forgiven to some point. Um, Mutual understanding, I think, is a big thing because a lot of characters in the show, they all have gone through something. Now, whether that's they lost somebody they loved, or they grew up poor, or they just, were disliked for something they couldn't control. A lot of people in the show have different things that they grew up with and that they went through, but at the end of the day, that's how they relate to each other. And that's kind of what Payne talks about in his philosophy, but we'll get into that in a little bit. And commonality between certain people, there's certain people in the show that do get along, even though they don't have similar philosophies. Like I'd say Madara and Obito. While they don't have the same exact philosophy, they have a common goal. They both think they can reach what they believe in through the same thing. Next is hard work over unrealistic perfection can bring us closer because we are all have to work hard, and everybody in the show works hard, just because certain characters are given certain gifts like, the clan that they're in, the eyes that they have, the jutsu that they know, their Kekkei Genkai, it all still they still have to work hard, all of them. And even some characters in the show that don't have those abilities, such as, Rock Lee or Mike Guy, they all still have to work hard because at the end of the day, just because you have something and like a tailed beast, right? Just because you have something in you doesn't mean that you're gonna be better than somebody else. And yeah, they have certain advantages, being an Uchiha, being a part of Kaguya's clan. Certain things will give you certain advantages, but that's not necessarily the case with everything. And hard work being over unrealistic perfection. Unrealistic perfection kind of means like, you expect somebody to be perfect right off the bat. Like as soon as you learn something, you need to be good with it, and that's just not how people develop. When you start at something, you're not going to be good, but when you work hard, that's what gets you over those hurdles and those obstacles. Having a bond with people, especially people in your community, nurtures the society you live in. You know, right now in society we have a lot of division, but when you have bonds with individuals, and you have a lot of bonds, that's how you kind of nurture, I guess, your community, which, society is just made up of a bunch of little communities. So that's probably part of what believing in other people and working hard with them, you grow closer together because you've seen each other's journeys. And when a society is made up of a bunch of people that have worked hard together, you can have a lot of discourse with people that will understand where you're coming from and when you have a certain viewpoint, right? Instead of just having division and arguments. Defeating hatred, or defeated hatred, I guess you could say, stops generational cycles of violence and hatred. And I think I might have meant, also it could, instead of hatred at the end, you could put pain, right? So when you defeat hatred, you know, you def- you're defeating a cycle of what's been going on for generations. And I've talked about this in my Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood analysis. But there's a lot of anime, and there's even a lot of just fiction and media that talk about the cycle of hatred, right? Like this group hates this group more, and then and then the group A hates group B, and then group B ends up hating group A, and then group A tries to forgive group B, but group B hates group A, and then the next generation of group A hates group B, and vice versa. Every time one side tries to forgive the other, they can't get over the gap of the other side hating them for it. And that's where you gotta be the bigger person. Just because you're trying to forgive somebody and they still hate you because of what your ancestors did, or in Naruto, really, it's not even their ancestors. It's almost directly what they did. I mean, not ancestors, but more of generational. When you hate somebody because something your village did, the show's villages, ninja villages. That's what the show's about. Um, when you hate somebody because they're from a certain village and they don't have any malice towards you, it changes your perspective a lot. And then you let them know that you hate them and you don't want anything to do with them, and they still are completely fine with you. Then it really makes you numb to the hatred that you have for them. How are you supposed to hate them if they don't accept your hatred? And vice versa. How is somebody gonna hate you if you don't accept it? We can't allow people to hate us and for us to acknowledge it and hate them back. That's not how you solve the problem. And Naruto has a lot about generational pain, I think, when it comes to wars, right? People losing family members, people losing, assets, they're like where they live or their money, or just growing up poor or impoverished. Naruto has a lot of commentary on that without directly stating something. Some things are very directly stated and some aren't. They're more hinted to. So the first character we're going to talk about is obviously Naruto, and I think his philosophy, if it's very hard to kind of pin down, but I think utilitarianism would be kind of a way for him to go. But I saw when I was researching, I saw a lot of people say, utilitarianism, but optimistic idealism, I think, is for Naruto, because Naruto doesn't just have, he doesn't necessarily have a way he wants things to happen. He doesn't know like the specifics. He just has a vision, right? And I can understand that completely because sometimes, people say, "Oh, well, we can't get this done. It's too unrealistic." And it says, "Well, who's saying it's unrealistic? Who's making these rules that say, oh, this is too unrealistic to get done, that's too unrealistic to get done? Who makes those rules? It really doesn't matter how unrealistic something is. If you have a vision and you want to execute it, you're almost reverse engineering it, right? So with Naruto, we see that socializing, I think I might have had a typo here, but socializing is essential and important to the success of humans. We're very social creatures, and when we work together, we can achieve things that nobody could achieve on their own. And in Naruto, you see he's very isolated at a young age. When the village kind of disrespects him or they don't like him, and because he's got the tailed beast in him, he gets to the point where he doesn't let their hate cloud his judgment of them. Judges them very fairly, and he understands where they're coming from, even though he shouldn't have to. And it's something that he can't control. He still managed to do it. So, and he really shows us the idea of bonds, right? And sharing your bond with other people, it increases your humanity. You see where they come from. It's easy to judge people that are different from you, right? But then when you grow closer to them, you see, their upbringing, what they've gone through to get to where they're at. You can understand why they would have certain opinions and feel certain ways. You can understand why they wouldn't like this person or this, maybe even like a politician. You can understand why they wouldn't like them because it goes against everything that they fought so hard to get to. And my first point on the last slide is kind of what Naruto embodies: persistent empathy, right? I mean, with his talk no jutsu, right, he can make people almost completely change their point of view completely with everything that he says and does and that he believes in, right? Everything, he just, with everything that you've done, he won't stop trying to convert you, right, to the side of what he considers goodness and empathy and kindness. And he's persistent about it. You can see that with Sasuke. I think a lot of people misunderstand how Sasuke and his relationship are. He's not saying that Sasuke is more important than anybody, but he's saying if he can't save Sasuke, somebody who he has a bond with, how's he gonna save a whole village, right? So instead of killing people, right? Instead of fighting them, knocking them out, or even killing them, he his goal is to convert people and convince them, right? And he's got a good story because of the way he grew up and how much he's overcame. So he can use that to his advantage, and he can, and that's why I think empathy is very hard to get, right? Because you can have a lot of sympathy for somebody, but empathy, you truly got to be in their shoes. And with him, he's experienced something. A lot of people in the show, a lot of villains, he's actually gone through worse than them. And spoiler alert, right, for anybody that's watching right now, spoiler alert, but at certain points in the show, when he loses people he loves, when he goes through stuff, he's an outcast, he's failed compared to all of his peers, and he ends up being one of the strongest people in the show at the end of the show. And how does that work? Well, it's through the way he's able to talk to people, and the people that he's fought, he's able to convince them to. And there's kind of this idea in the show. I just cut myself off, but there's kind of an idea in the show that when two people fight, right, they exchange more words than any conversation could. And it's very interesting because you see, after he fights somebody, he's able to understand where they're coming from in some way. And acceptance and understanding can bridge the gap between any disagreement. So when you see somebody and you don't like how they run their life, you don't like the ideas they have, when you have acceptance and understanding for where they're coming from and what they've done and the person they're trying to be, when you accept somebody for who they're trying to be, you can bridge the gap between any type of disagreement or, you know, opposite opinion, right? And I could make a whole video on Naruto. I think I might one day, but if there's any characters you want me to make a whole video on, let me know. But next, we're gonna have Pain. Now, when I'm talking about the idea of pain slash the name of pain, I try to put it in highlight. But this is what I talked about in the first slide as well. The cycle of pain, right? So with pain, he argued that peace was achievable, but only through suffered sharing and hardship, right? So everybody has to lose a loved one at least once in their life so they can understand other people. That's the thing about Naruto. He was able to apply his pain to other people who, whether experienced more or less or the equal amount of pain as him, although they weren't in the same situation, they were able to. He was able to understand where they were coming from. Now, Pain argued, well, what if everybody had just goes through some type of suffering? That way, they can all get along, right? So, what if everybody has a year where they can't afford food, right? And that's a very generalized statement for what he believed in, but it's interesting thinking about it, right? What if everybody went through the same exact type of thing? Because for him, he's able to he's able to understand people that went through the same pain as him, but other people that went through something different, such as Naruto, who didn't have parents, who lost a lot of people that he cares about, who was seen as an outcast. They also had the same sensei, and he died. So for it to be understood that you can know how somebody's feels, you have to go through what they went through, or they have to go through what you've went through, and it's a very weird way of thinking about it. But in a way, he believed that pain itself was a language that humans could understand without even having to talk, right? Just from emotions and understanding how somebody could feel after going through something. So two things that I saw a lot with pain was, I guess, this kind of ethical, consequentialism, where when you go through something and you understand how it feels to suffer, because you have to understand how it feels to suffer to understand that you don't want to do that to anybody else. And so if everybody felt that, then nobody would want to do it to each other, right? And then kind of like this retributive justice where when two people go through the same thing, they can become better people because of it. Because after you go through something, you should want, and where he fails in certain ways is not everybody like him, right? When they go through something, they become a better person. You could argue that he became a worse person after he went through something. Naruto became a better person every time he goes through something. Everybody's different. And that's I think the problem with his ideal. Although he does have a very interesting case, and I do really like him. He's actually my favorite villain in the show because he's the character that really shuts Naruto up. Right? He's the character that makes Naruto, for a second, Because I said Naruto has a vision, right? And he tries to reverse engineer his way to that vision by doing whatever he thinks will make it happen. But Pain is just like, well, the vision you have is it's not realistic. It can't be done. And there's a lot of quotes in the show where people acknowledge that Naruto's idea for the world is childish, right? It can't be done. It's impossible because it's so like like he wants to create a utopia for everybody on Earth, and people just say that's not realistic. That's not going to happen. Suffering has to exist, but he says no. Why? And I love both sides of that, right? And Naruto's just like, why does suffering have to exist? Who said that? Who set those rules up, right? So the next character is Itachi. Now Itachi is a very interesting character because he believes that everybody is limited by their own belief, and he's willing to. He was like what he did in the show is very controversial. I mean, he killed kids. He basically genocided his whole clan. Or I guess he cleansed it. You could say he believes that. I think he kind of believes like it's like the opposite of hierarchy in a way. Like he believes that no single person, I guess, like not one person should be in charge. Multiple people, maybe a council or something like that. But with the way he discusses like ethics, he doesn't think that any single person understands the whole world, right? He doesn't even think that he does at certain points. He doubts himself in the show, but we see him put aside his personal biases and feelings, and he kills his own parents, he kills his whole clan, and so I guess the question is, do the ends justify the means with him? Because he believes that although his vision is clouded, he's being used for a greater purpose. I think, kind of like the bigger picture. But where I guess he kind of fails is sometimes you believe people are so clouded that your own judgment becomes unclouded because you just can excuse anything because you're just like, well, nobody knows anything, so how is he supposed to know this when he knows? Like if somebody's really good at something, how they can't be really good at everything. So how are you supposed to know, like, when it comes to, I guess, leading or making a decision such as killing a whole clan? How are you supposed to justify it when you think everybody has faults? Because then that admits that you have faults, but then you could kind of use that as an excuse to say, well, it's just my fault, right? So I think that his while his mindset is very realistic, it can also be used as an excuse to just allow bad things to happen. And we were never truly know if what he did stopped more suffering or created more suffering. Right? We don't know how bad the war would have been, and so because he sacrifices innocent lives for what he deems to be a better world, or at least he sacrifices 100 lives because he thinks he's saving a million. But you really won't never know, and that's I guess where his judgment would be clouded himself. But I guess his kind of way he thinks about it is epistemic humility, right? So he's very humble himself, but being humble is basically just saying, well, nobody has the right judgments, so I might as well just do this because, in a way, there's definitely arguments about what his character represents, but I think that is a good starting point. So Madara is actually hard for me to pin down, but I think it's pessimistic utopianism. And with Madara, he really wants to impose a false peace to take control. Now, is that okay? I think is the question of his whole thing. I think many people would look at what he does, and well, they do. They look at what he did and they say, well, there's nothing really wrong with that. I get why you wouldn't want it, but I get why you would. But I guess the hard thing is it okay to sacrifice individual freedom for a false world harmony, right? Is it fair for you to sacrifice everything that people stand for if they get the perfect world inside of their head? He kind of fought for total control and to be at peace, even if the peace is false, though. So is it fair to say that what he was fighting for is real? Maybe he was, because people say, well, Naruto's idealistic, right? He has a dream that can never be accomplished, but Madara wanted to literally put people in a dream, right? A world that probably wouldn't even be possible. So you could argue, in a way, he was like an imperfect version of Naruto. Naruto wanted to create the reality that he was falsely creating. And he's it's almost like, does consent matter, right? Does If you create a perfect world, does it matter what people have to say? And most people would argue, well, yeah, but then you're completely arguing against his point because he's not asking people, right? Do you want to be inside of this? Do you not? He's telling people, everybody's going to be inside of it, otherwise it wouldn't work. So it's total control, but he sees himself as having good intentions. And he thinks doing this will end the cycle of I guess, war and hatred, but at what cost, I guess? Individual freedom, you could say. And human agency, is it important enough? If Is it so important that getting rid of it and getting peace from that would be a bad result? That's the real question with him. So it's a very interesting, there's a lot of nuance to what he has to say. Right? There's no easy answers for that. So next is Hidan. Now Hidan, he doesn't have a lot of screen time, but he's in a very, one of my favorite arcs in the show. But he's religious extremism, right? I mean, he's one of the only religious characters in the show, and although the religion he has, I don't know much about. I do hope maybe to learn it. I don't know if it took inspiration from a real religion or not. We see him going around spreading news of his religion. Now, I don't think anybody in the show. There might be some filler, right? Well, I think there might be some filler with some members of it, but as far as I know, nobody in the show really goes around talking about the same religion that he does. Now, he spreads his religion through voice of mouth, right? But he also does it through murder and violence, which would give a bad connotation. And obviously, being a Christian myself, I could understand why people would be afraid of him and his religion when they see what he does as a follower of it. And he also performs religious actions that are unfamiliar with. I think I meant to put with other people, right? So, the religion. I think it's Joshin. I think that's the name of it. I think I might have heard something of it. I think it has a different name. But with the way he goes around, trying to spread it voice of mouth with violence, though, and making people conform to it, you know, it puts a bad connotation behind what he believes in. And it would have been interesting if we saw some people that also followed the same God, but I don't know. They don't really talk about it that much. Next is Daedalus. So Daedalus' whole philosophy is basically art, and that's a horrible picture I have of him. But so he thinks life is expressed through art, right? So and that's very relatable nowadays. We see people painting, poems, books, writing, drawing, all type of art. We see people express themselves through it, right? And that's how people kind of show who they are, right? They use art. And that's not crazy. Now the way he does it, he's a little extreme with it. His art is clay. He explodes things with clay, and the way he uses art, like he expresses himself. So expressions of art, I guess, would be kind of what you say. But it explains how we feel, right, and why we do what we do. Art really shows, because things you can't put into words, you can put into art, and I can agree with that completely. So with him, it's kind of like an extreme version of art is life. And people say, without art, the world would just be EH. It would be just be eh. So, Earth would be. So that's kind of where he comes from. And he uses explosive clay to express himself. Now, that could represent how he has an explosive personality, or that could represent a couple other things. But for the most part, I think, art, and the expressions of art is kind of his personal philosophy. So next is loyalist and loyalism. We're talking about Kisame. So he was very loyal to his village. Then he was loyal to the Akatsuki. Now, with his character, you really have to ask: is blind loyalty dangerous? Right? Is what he does dangerous, or is it admirable? Right? I mean, we see people in the military die for their country. Are they loyal, or some people think they're fools. Some people think that they're dying for other people, dying for millionaires. I guess the real question is, whatever you're dying for, what do they stand for, and do you believe in their message? We see him question himself a lot while he's at his village. We see him he kills his comrades to protect his village. Now, who is he loyal to at that point? You know, and you see in the manga at times he questions himself. He says, who is he loyal to? Is he loyal to himself or is he loyal to the village? When you're loyal to yourself, you don't kill your friends. You know, you don't kill your family. You don't kill anybody that you're close with. But then he asks himself, well, who am I loyal to if I'm killing them? Am I loyal to the village? Am I that loyal? He killed a fellow ninja of the village he was in to protect the village, you know? And it gets to the point where what if everybody's corrupt? You have to kill everybody? There wouldn't be any village at that point. He asks himself in the show, oh, sorry about that. He asks himself in the show, is he an enemy or an ally? So, what does that really mean? And if he's an enemy, who's he enemy to? Is it the village? Is the idea of the village and the people that actually live there, you might say they're the same thing, but in a way they're different. Because the idea of the village is kind of like the idea of society, and the idea of the people that actually live there are the ones that actually make up the society. So if you killed everybody there, then the village would be gone, and the society wouldn't be there anymore. But if you allowed intel to get out to enemies that would collapse the society, then people would die anyway. So, who you're loyal to and why you're loyal to them, I think, are two questions that you can kind of see with his character, and they're important to know in any situation. So, a little spoiler, but we got Kakuzu. So, capitalism and opportunism. You don't really see a lot of, economic and, especially capitalism ideas in the show. But with Kisame, and just because he's money hungry is not why I made him capitalism. It's the way he perceives money. I think he thinks money is what makes people powerful. And that's what he sees when he looks at money. And he was shunned by his village for not being able to kill Hashirama, which is very unfair. And so he was imprisoned for turning up without killing him. And so many would see that as unfair because Hashirama was the strongest known, if not, one of the strongest, then the strongest person of his time, of his generation. So not being able to kill him, that shouldn't be that's not necessarily a fair reason to, you know, shun somebody or imprison them, because they came back without completing their mission, yeah, but their mission was almost impossible. And it was a suicide mission, so just saying, oh, he didn't complete his mission, there's a lot more context to it. So after that, he loses his village, he's with the Akatsuki, he's the Akatsuki's treasurer, so he's definitely good with money. And we see that, when we first see him, he takes the opportunity to, collect a couple bounties, or at least collect one bounty. And we see him, hunting bounties, and he looks for opportunities to earn money. So we see different points in the show where he definitely kind of seems like somewhat capitalistic, somewhat opportunistic, and he's got a very similar loyalty code to Kisame. That's why I wanted to talk about Kisame first, because the way he perceives loyalty and the way people function is very important to his character. Now, Conan, she is a very realistic person. She had the same sensei as Yahiko, the same sensei as Pain, the same sensei as Naruto. They all went under Jiraiya. And I'm thinking I might do a part two to this because there's a lot of characters I didn't include, in Jiraiya as one of them. But Jiraiya, he had a very, peaceful teachings about peace and world peace. But after she loses her friends and her allies, she sees those ideas as impossible and flawed. And just like Pain, she sees, that maybe we could create some type of world where everybody is even and fair and equal in value, but that world would have to be created through some type of realistic way. And she sees, Pain's idea as the realistic way. After losing her friend, before she felt like world peace was achievable through kind of like the same means as Naruto, but afterwards she sees it as the same means as maybe, well, definitely the same means as Pain because she helps Pain out, but maybe even Madara, who knows how she would have reacted to that. She's very revolutionary, right? She believes in her cause and the idea of, fighting against a power. Um, especially when you believe that power has too much power, like such as a village or some type of hierarchy or society. Um, she's willing to use violence to achieve what she believes in, and we see that with a lot of revolutionaries. So I think she's a good example of somebody that has the right idea and is a very classic example of a revolutionary. Now with Orochimaru, we see educational slash scientific philosophy, right? Like almost, right, yeah, and you can see right there on screen. I said scientific nihilism. Progressing, getting stronger, making achievements. That's all that matters to him for the most part. He wants to be immortal. He tries to develop immortality, and he somewhat did, so he can do more science and more experiments. And he goes to extremes like experimenting on people just to figure things out. He wants to understand the way the world works, and he pursues forbidden techniques in the name of progress. Now, we see other shows, and I also talked about this in my Full Metal Alchemist analysis, but we see sometimes you can go too far with science, sometimes you can go too far with progress and experiments. And how does it affect other people? How does it affect society when you get to the point where you're harming, more people than you're saving? Now, I know he doesn't really care about saving people, so I guess it really, your intentions are important as well, right? So scientific nihilism is definitely a big part of what he believes in. So we have Kakashi, and I have a little quote right here, and I think this sums up a lot of Kakashi. But he says, "Those who don't take care of their comrades are lower than trash." So he wouldn't have been very happy with Kisame, but he says he's a very. I put his philosophy as pragmatic virtue, right? So kind of like a realistic way of looking at, almost like a mix between realism and idealism, right? Idealism. He's got a balance of morals and duty, and he talks about you know being so devoted to your comrades that they're above you, right? He believes about learning from past mistakes, and that's important that you can see what you've done before and how you can improve in the future. And he also believes that no one's perfect. So similar to Itachi, he has some humility because he also believes that he's not perfect himself, but he has a respect for traditions with an acceptance of progress, right? He's willing to respect old ways of doing stuff, but he's also willing to adapt to new ways of doing stuff, and we see him do it throughout the show. Um, he believes that rules are important. He's not an anarchist, but he also believes that systems can hurt people at times, and having certain mindset of okay, the government's always right or the leaders are always right can be dangerous to certain people. He's willing to sacrifice himself to save others. He's not just gonna let his comrades die. He wouldn't just give up on them. No, he would be willing to sacrifice himself to save other people, which is a very big part of his character. Now, Obito. Obito is very interesting, and I could probably do a video on him, but I got a quote right here. It says, "I get it now. I'm in hell." He says that. So, with Obito, I see a lot of themes of escapism, right? He wants to abandon reality because it's cruel to him, and he wants to escape to a fantasy, and he wants to escape to the same fantasy that Madara was trying to create. He believes the world is inherently broken, and probably part of the speech that Madara gave him made him think that, right? He sees himself as a necessary evil, right, to create a world of peace, even if that peace is somewhat false. And I say somewhat false, but really it's completely false, right? That peace is nothing but an illusion. If everybody in the world, let's say somebody came to you and they said they could put every single person on planet Earth into a peaceful reality, right? But it's just all in their mind. Their bodies are just like vessels for what their mind is seeing. Would you be okay with that? I think a lot of people would, but a lot of people wouldn't, right? So you gotta ask yourself, why escape from this world when we can fix it? He understands that the world is an endless cycle of hatred, and this is the way he wants to end it. Every character in the show understands the cycle of hatred, but the way they do it almost sows more hatred. And it reminds me of a quote from Fallout. It's like same thing that always happens. Everybody wants to save the world, they just can't agree how. Naruto wants to have a perfect utopia, and he's trying to reverse engineer the way to get to it. Obito wants to escape from the world. He thinks the world is an awful place and he wants to leave it. Madara, he kind of wants to do the same thing, but he wants to be the creator of it and kind of burden the pain of knowledge, I guess. Um, and we see with Pain, he wants to create a perfect world where everybody has some type of wound that they can bond with. And Kakashi, he's a little more, I guess, authoritative. He thinks governments are important and rules are important, but he also knows that systems can hurt people. Next is, oh, the key takeaways. So I didn't actually do Sasuke in this video, but I think I will do him in a future video. But the key takeaways from this are, I think the question is, a big takeaway from Naruto is, can anyone be truly forgiven? And I don't think I actually spelled this wrong. I said, can anybody be truly forgiving? Right? Some people, they have a very big problem with forgiving people that have done wrong to them in the past. And obviously, it depends on what they've done to you. But getting over it, sometimes forgiving isn't for the perpetrator, but it's for the perpetrated. Forgiving people sometimes helps you more than the person that you forgave, right? So that's a big important part of it. Um, but can somebody be truly forgiven, right? I mean, with somebody that's done something awful, it's always going to kind of linger around, for a lot of people that are involved. Next is, different ideologies, are willing to work together to achieve the same goal, right? So, somebody that, I guess you could say, Obito and Madara, they both have very different ideologies, but they both want to do the same thing. So we see that in the show, both of them kind of, work together to achieve something very similar, even though their ideologies are different. Same thing with, I guess you could say, Naruto and Sasuke, Hashirama and Madara as well. And, Kakashi, Might Guy, the Hokages, they all have different ideologies in a way. But and that's the whole show, like I just explained. Everybody understands that there's a cycle of hatred, but the way they want to end it, whether it's pain with the suffering, whether it's Madara with the infinite Tsukuyomi, whether it's Naruto with the utopia of idealism, everybody has a different way of trying to solve the world. And then we see pain, the cycle of pain. It exists. There's no denying that it's real, but the way we end it, I think, is the problem people are having. And we see hatred can spread easily. When you hate somebody, it's very easy to hate somebody. Being positive is almost an act of rebellion towards the world because you're saying I'm not going to conform, right? So when you see how hatred spreads, it makes kindness seem almost like a crazy concept in a way. And I guess the last question the show really asks is somebody redeemable or unredeemable? What at one point does somebody get to where this person has to die? We can't put them in jail. We can't one day maybe let them walk among society. There's just no way it's possible. Right? I think that's an important question the show asks, and I think it doesn't necessarily give an answer, but we see Naruto the way he thinks everybody can be redeemed. So yeah, I mean that is everything. If you like the video, leave a like on the video. If you want to see more, subscribe, and yeah, let me know if there's any Naruto characters you want me to do a whole video on. I'll probably do a part 2 of this. If there's any other characters in fiction and media, that you want me to do a video on, let me know. Is there any books, mangas, movies, TV shows, video games, animes? Let me know. Comics, let me know. And I could get around to doing a video on it. So I hope everybody enjoyed the video, and I hope everybody has a good day.